Shalom and welcome to the video for chapters 19 and 20. As you can see from the screen here, we're going to deal with commands, or referred to otherwise as imperatives, and then also the infinitives. So here are our two focus questions, the foci for the day. First, how does one give commands in Hebrew? So how do you tell somebody that you want that person to do something? That's one question. The second one is this: how does the Hebrew pa'al infinitive look like, and how does it function in a sentence? So we're actually going to learn two forms of the infinitive. We'll get into that a little bit later. I do want to offer one warning though. But before proceeding, you may want to consider familiarizing yourself with the section on numbers in chapter 19, not the book of Numbers, but numbers as in numerals, Hebrew numbers. And that's, again, you'll find in chapter 19, and your entire vocabulary list, in fact, from 19 consists of numbers. So it's very important that you learn these. You can't just sort of push these to the side, because these will show up on your quiz. So I suggest that you at least look at the numbers first. Take the rest of the week to memorize them, but at least look at the numbers and gain some familiarity with them before you proceed, because some of the sentences that we'll do a little bit later will assume knowledge of these numbers, or will make use of some of these numbers. Okay, so let's begin with commands or imperatives. So here you can see I have an example from contemporary pop culture. Noah, build an ark. Do this thing, Noah. I want when God is, at least in this little story here, commanding Noah to go build something. And this is how we do the imperative. In English, we have a single form, which we then use to address. You could use this, hey guys, build an ark, if you wanted to refer to multiple people, or say something, or sit down, or eat your vegetables, whatever it is. That's how we do it in English. It's going to be a little bit different in Hebrew, as we'll discover, because in Hebrew, the form of the verb will change based on the person you are addressing. But this just gives us a little entry into commands and helps us engage them on familiar ground. So commands and imperatives. I want you to know there are three things that I want you to know about the Hebrew imperative, and I've just lifted these out of the chapter, but they make for a good entry into the imperative. First one is this: the Hebrew imperative has to agree with the addressed person, persons, or group in terms of gender and number. That is, it doesn't matter, the verb is not inflected according to who says the command, but rather who is addressed. And it will be inflected in terms of both gender, so masculine, feminine, and also in terms of number, excuse me, that is a singular or plural. And then all of these are going to be based on the second person form of the imperfect, as you can see from the second point. So that's where the person part comes in. The imperative is based on the second person form of the imperfect. So this actually works out to our advantage. Since we've been working on the imperfect for the past few weeks, we can use that background knowledge, as you'll see in the next slide, to help us learn the imperative. Thirdly, the imperative can be negated. You can be negated either with the addition of lo plus the prefix conjugation, and this will refer to permanent prohibition, so we'll look at that in a couple slides, or all plus the prefix conjugation, and that will refer to temporary prohibition. So I'll give you some examples of what I mean by that. Let's look first at the form, the morphology of the verb, and here you can see on the left our lovely queens telling us off with his head. You might say, what on earth does that have to do with the imperfect? In this case, it has a lot to do with it. Let's look at the example, the row on the right, the imperfect. You know these things using the common root shamar. So the first one, tishmor. Tishmor, you will guard. So this is second masculine singular, pa'al imperfect. Now, how do you make that into an imperative? It's easy. Off with his head. Look to the left, and you'll see shmor. Okay, not the little campfire dainties, but the imperative guard, referring to a second masculine singular subject. So from tishmor to shmor, all that they did was remove the tav. the prefix, that is, its head, its grammatical head. Let's look at the second one down, tishmeri, shimri. So if you want to go from imperfect or prefix conjugation, tishmeri, if you want to turn that second feminine singular verb into an imperative, all you have to do, off with his head. So you'll notice we now get shimri. The only other change that you get here is that Hebrew doesn't like having two shvas next to one another when the first one when it's under the first and second radicals, and so the first shvaz is changed to a hirik, so that's why we have shimri. But again, that's a very minor change. This by and large looks identical to the imperfect form minus the chopping off of the head. That is the removal of the prefix tav. And then the same for the last two, tishmeru, shimru, right? So you, that is you, masculine plural, you guys, or as you may remember, when you have a mixed group in Hebrew and they want to give a command or talk about action that they are undertaking, you use the masculine when you have a mixed gender group. And then the final verb, tishmorna, and then shmorna. These are this is on the right, the second feminine plural, pa'al imperfect, and then on the left, the second feminine plural, pa'al imperative. This form is so rare, we're not even really going to touch on it much, but it's important just that you see that it's there and the way in which the principle is working, moving from imperfect to commands, imperfect to imperative. Again, all that they did was remove the tav, off with its head, so that there you get the command, as noted above, based on the imperfect. So let's look at just a few practice things. So here we're going to have our queen chopping off some heads. So look at the first one, tishmor, you will guard. Shmor, can you think of what it might be? So this is the imperative form. Guard, you, that is you, masculine singular, guard. And again, the inflection, that is whether it's singular or plural, or masculine or feminine, doesn't depend on the speaker. It depends on the person who's being addressed. So you, guy, masculine singular guy, you guard, shmor. Here's the next word, tizkeru, second masculine plural, from zachar, the word having to do with remembering things. So this would be you all will remember. Standard imperfect form. If we want to turn that into an imperative, we simply chop off its head, zikru. You all, masculine plural, remember. You all remember. Okay, so that's just to show you again how simple a move it is from the imperfect to the imperative. But you'll also notice that it helps if you know the imperfect extremely well. If you know the imperfect very well, this will be a very easy shift. If not, then you might have some struggles. So you may need to spend, if you're having troubles moving from imperfect to imperative, you may need to review your imperfect conjugations, just as a way of making your knowledge foundation more firm. Let's look here at another one, tikhi. It's kind of a challenging one to put all together because of all these k's and chet sounds. Okay, so what do you think about this first verb? And it is imperfect, right? Because we have the tav, and the hirik yod should tell us something. Maybe that it's second feminine singular. But if tav is the prefix and hirik yod is the suffix, the ending telling us it's second feminine singular, what is the three-letter root? Do you remember? This is from lakach. You may remember lakach is one of those words that loses its prefix in the imperfect. So this is you, feminine singular, speaking about a female subject. You will take. Tikhi. Now, what if you wanted to turn that into an imperative? Kechi. It's a little bit hard to say, but again, the operation here is very simple. Remove the prefix, and you're left with kechi, and that would simply be take, feminine singular. So you would be referring probably in this case to a woman. Take something. We don't have a sentence, so we don't quite know. Next verb, ta'asu. Again, this, you look and you would say, okay, I have a prefix, right, the tav, and then we have the u at the end. So we would know this is second masculine plural, pa'al imperfect. What is the root? Do you remember? The root is asa, so it has to do with doing and making. And this is second masculine plural, so you all will do. You will do, second masculine plural, referring collectively to a mixed gender group or maybe just all to men. We don't know, no sentence. And how would you pluralize or turn that into an imperative? Asu, asu, right here. So you do or make. Notice the only difference here again being the tav is missing. Okay, let's look at a few sentences now and see what we can come up with. Kach shalosh behema v'teisha tzon. What do you make of that sentence? What do you see there that looks familiar? Some things will look a little bit unfamiliar because there are two numbers in here. Shalosh is a number referring to 3, and then v'teisha is a number referring to 9. So look at that for a moment. You'll probably recognize behema, which is the word for beast or animal or cattle. And then tzon is, of course, the word for flock. So what do we get? Oh, well, let's look. And then here's the imperative, right? Kach. Do you recognize what kach is? This is, again, from lakach, and we have the lamed missing. Remember, lakach, as I noted in the last slide, is one of those verbs in which the lamed often drops out. So we have take 3 cattle and 9 flocks. Take 3 cattle, or 3 animals, you could also say, and 9 flocks. And so the imperative here, the important part here, is the kach. And that is a second masculine singular verb. So you're saying take, and you're referring to a singular masculine subject. Again, it doesn't matter who's saying it, it's who is addressed that dictates how the noun is inflected. Let's look at the next sentence. Imru et hadavar hazeh el chameshet hasarim. Okay, so imru et hadavar hazeh el chameshet hasarim. Okay, probably some familiar words here. Hadavar. Okay, so the word hadavar hazeh, this word, right? We have the demonstrative with the definite article following immediately upon the noun. This word. So we know something is going to happen about this word, and el is the word for 2. Chameshet. Do you remember that? Chameshet. This is a new word. It's a number. It means 5. And then the last word, hasarim, these are the princes or the chiefs, reference to rulers. And then et, of course, being the direct object marker that is not translated. So that leaves us with imru. What do you make of that? Well, it looks. You might say, well, it kind of looks like a third common plural, all perfect. So, but that would be amru, wouldn't it? That would require beneath the olive having a comment. So that would be amru, and that would be they spoke. But that's not what this is. The vowels differ a little bit here. This is the imperfect with its prefix chopped off. And then all you're left with is the ending, the suffix u, and then the hirik and the shava. So this is say this word. I will give you this. Say or speak this word to the 5 chiefs. Okay, and I will. I'm not going to explain how numbers work here. That's something you need to do on your own and look into in chapter 19. Again, this is why I suggested that you look at the numbers first before you look through this or watch this lecture. Okay, next sentence. Asu lachem asara mizbechot. Asu lachem asara mizbechot. Okay, let's start taking this sentence apart. Lachem, do you recognize this? Well, this could be a little bit tricky. This is the lamed plus the chem, and chem is the second masculine plural pronominal suffix. So we know this means at this point to you or to y'all. Asara is the word for 10, and mizbechot is the plural of altars, for the word for altars. So all we're left with here is the imperative, asu, asu. So it is, in this case, this is from asa, right? And the hey has dropped off. And so we're left with effectively the imperfect from asa without its prefix, and the rest is all the same, asu. So make for yourselves and I get the for yourselves from the lachem, right? Make for yourselves 10 mizbechot, 10 altars. Okay, last one. Lech habaita im na'ar echad. Okay, let's start with habaita. This is the word for bayit, the word for house, right? But it has the directional hey on it, the comet's hey there. And so we know that there's going to be some kind of movement toward the house. The definite article is on bayit. And then im is the preposition with, na'ar is the young man, and then echad is the word for one. So a single thing. And so we may again look at the numbers and you'll see what that's all about. And so we have here, well, let's look at the imperative. Lech, lech, that's the only verb actually in here. Do you recognize what that's from? Lech. This is from the verbal stem halach, so having to do with walking or movement, and lech being the second masculine singular form of it. So the hey actually drops off in this case. Lech habayit im na'ar, na'ar echad. And so we would get the translation, actually, there we go. So we get the translation, whoops, go toward the house with one young man. Okay, so again, look at the numbers and how those work. Yeah, so lech, again, I put a couple of these in here just because they're drop letters and they are a little bit more challenging to recognize, but these are essentially, follow the same rules in terms of the removal of the prefix. They're headless imperfects. So some practice sentences. Let's go to prohibitions. That is, how do you do an imperative negatively? How do you say something negative? In fact, you might expect that they would use the imperative form, but Hebrew actually does not. Hebrew uses the imperfect, or actually we should say the prefix conjugation, and adds the words lo and all. Now, what's the difference? Well, here we go. The imperative form is not used to give commands, as I said. They use all and lo. Lo is used for permanent prohibition. Thou shalt not murder, as an example. So murder is sort of categorically condemned for all time. All refers to immediate or temporary prohibition. So let me tell you a story that Dr. Mark Thronfight likes to use when he's teaching about the difference between lo and all. Who knows if the story is real or if he just created it and it just works so well that he continues to use it. So he says, one day I was watching Dukes of Hazzard, and my young son came to me and said, Daddy, teach me about Jesus. I want to learn about Jesus. And he says, no, go get me another beer and wait until the show is over. So the question is, when he says no, no, I'm not going to do this, is he referring there to a permanent prohibition, never ask me this, or is this temporary and immediate saying, do not ask me about this now, and wait until the show is over? And of course the answer is the second one. It would be all, right? A temporary, it's not thou shalt not ask daddy about Jesus, but rather not now because I'm in the middle of a TV show. So immediate or temporary prohibition. And so I have two sentences as examples at the bottom. Lo ta'aseh milchama. That's you shall not make war. And that would be a sort of categorical prohibition. Thou shalt not make war. But if you use it with all ta'aseh milchama, don't make war. That is right now. You could imagine, for instance, a prophet or a king consulting a prophet and saying, should we go to war now? And the prophet would most likely not say, lo ta'aseh milchama, thou shalt never make war. There are no pacifistic prophets, at least not the way, that categorically condemn war. Or all violence for that matter. They would most likely say, al ta'aseh milchama, don't make war at this time. And so Hebrew makes this subtle distinction. That's all the practice we're going to do there. It's just a subtle point I want to bring up, a small point, but an important one. And just really the most important thing here is to recognize the difference between lo and all, and also to recognize that when Hebrew wants to do a negative command saying don't do this, they don't use the imperative form, they actually use the imperfect, or we should say more accurately, the prefix form of the verb, and then they add either lo or all. Let's move now to the infinitive. This is the second major topic for the day. The infinitive is given this name because it has no limitations. It's not finite with respect to gender, number, person, or tense aspect. That's the first point. The second was we're going to learn two forms of the infinitive. The first one I'm going to call the infinitive construct, and the infinitive construct is used is used with prepositions, pronominal, suffixes, and is sometimes self-standing. That is, it doesn't have either a preposition or a suffix. It's just standing there on its own. The second infinitive is called the infinitive absolute. It is used without any prepositions at all and without any suffixes, and it's often used as emphasis, to emphasize another word, in fact, of the same root. Now, these two types of infinitives actually look different, so I'm going to spend a couple minutes showing you how they look different. Okay, let's begin with the infinitive construct. There are four groups, and when I say groups, I'm referring here to how the infinitive looks. That is, how its vowels are configured. And in this case, the vowels are very important. Here's group number one. I'm looking at it right here. This group typically looks, actually, it looks identical to the second masculine singular imperative. Notice zechor, zechor, has the shva and the holum there, and that looks just like the second masculine singular imperative. So in this case, you would have to kind of use context to determine the differences there. But that's group number one. This is kind of the standard group for the imperatives. It has the shva beneath the first root, and then the holum between the second and the third. Now, as noted earlier, this infinitive can actually take prepositions, and often it does. And a very common preposition is lamed here, although many others can be used as well. And so we would translate this, for instance, zechor, as to remember, to remember. Second group concerns infinitives that have roots that end in hey. These endlessly give us problems, right? These roots that end in hey, sometimes they drop off, sometimes they change into the tav, which is what happens here. So if an infinitive has a root that ends in hey, then it will look like this, asot. This is just an example, asot. So it will often end with the ot here. And so the tav is actually taking the place of the hey. And this is just one example. And again, here we see it working with the lamed attached. So in this case, asot comes from asa, so you would translate it how? How would you translate this infinitive? To do. And that's that's how you would do it in fact with both with the lamed and without it. Group 3, infinitives with drop letter roots. And so here's one example. So when you have a drop letter infinitive, a tav, again, is added to the drop letter form, but at the end. So in this case, you have lechet or la lechet, and this is the root halach, which means to walk, or refers to walking, going. And so what you see here is the hey on the front has dropped off, but it has gained a tav in the back. So this can be a little bit confusing with this one, but notice that group 3 really refers to drop letters that lose the first letter. So in this case, halach. So you have la lechet. And then the fourth group, I'll call these the infinitives of doom. That's a little bit apocalyptic, but these are very irregular, and I would suggest that you just look through them. Many of them are very common, though. For instance, lemor here. Let me use my cursor. Lemor, one of the most common infinitives, and it's often used actually as a sort of quotation mark. So if you wanted to say that a person is saying something, lemor would say would be the word that immediately precedes the quotation in Hebrew. And so here you can see these different infinitives used with a number of different prepositions. Here the kaf and the beit and the lamed. And these are simply irregular, and to be honest, if you're using a computer program and you're not recognizing it, but you think it's kind of an infinitive, maybe it has a preposition attached to it, then just use your Bible works, or try and determine if there's a missing root, what the missing root is, and then look it up. For instance, with Tate, I mean, this is just horrible. Look at this. Here's the root Natan, and the infinitive is Tate. So all that's left of the infinitive is the tav from the middle. So that's quite mean, I think, or la Tate. That's with the lamed attached. The Tate, etc. So these are irregular. You're simply going to have to learn to recognize them, or when you come across them, learn how to piece the root back together. Say, oh, this is really strange. Maybe I'm missing a letter. What letter could that be? And then you have to move from there. But very challenging. If you have a computer program, simply hover over the top of it. Okay, let's do a little bit of practice. Halachta lirot rak oto. So halachta, here we have you walked. Lirot, let's hold off on that. That's our infinitive. Rak oto. Rak means only. Oto is the the direct object indicator plus the third masculine singular pronominal suffix, so him. And so here we go. You walked lirot. Okay, remember when you have an ot ending, which of these groups does it fall in? Probably group number 2. And in fact, that's exactly what this is. This is from ra'ah. Ra'ah, which is the verb, has to do with seeing. So the translation here, you went to see only him. Rak means only. So you went to see only him. And so here the lamed actually functions in a purposive way to say, what is the purpose of your walking? Why did you walk, or why did you go? In order to see only him. Next one, Alena la reshet et eretz avicha. Okay, so here we have an imperative, ale. I'll just tell you that so we can, for the sake of time, we don't have to go through the whole process. This is second masculine singular imperative from Allah, which means to go up. Na, as you'll learn in your chapter, is a sort of flavoring particle that can be used as a way of kind of softening a command. So we might translate this as go up, please, but why? La reshet et eretz avicha. Here's our infinitive, lamed. So that's our preposition attached to the infinitive, reshet. And this is another drop letter infinitive. It's not ot, as in up here. So this is a drop letter. It's lost its first letter, and it is the verb yarash, which refers to inheriting. And so, go up, please. Please is the na. To inherit the land of your father. Again, this lamed functions in terms of purpose, to say go up, but why? In order to inherit your father's land, the land of your father. Biroti et Sarah gam ahavti ota. Okay, this one's going to be a little bit tricky, so let's take it slowly. Let's look at what we know. Et, direct object indicator, easy. Sarah, a name. Okay, that's fine. Gam, also, is what it means. Ahavti, I loved. This is the first common singular perfect, all perfect. And then ota. So so we know what it means. I loved her. That's part of it. We have also here. We have Sarah. Then we need to figure out what this infinitive is. There's a lot of stuff going on here, so if you don't recognize this immediately or how it's working, that's okay. Now, first thing we need to do is try and figure out what the root is. First thing you might notice is that you have a preposition on the front, the preposition bait. Preposition bait means in, on, or when. That's going to be key this time, when. And then what about resh aleph? Do you know any roots with resh aleph that have either a weak verb or a weak consonant at the back end, or a weak consonant on the front end? Well, maybe you remember the verb ra'ah, which has to do with seeing. So we have a bait. So it ends with a hey. So we have a bait, resh aleph, and the resh aleph is the root, and then oti. So you may have remembered that infinitives not only take prepositions, they can also take pronouns. And so the E here is indicating the first common singular pronoun. And typically when you have a pronoun on the end of an infinitive, that that pronoun is functioning as the subject of the infinitive. That is, it is the one doing the action. So let's take this apart really woodenly and say this. In seeing my. In my seeing. Or we might say, when I saw. That's really what's going on here. The bait functions temporally. In seeing I, that's really wooden, or when I saw Sarah, when I saw Sarah, gam ahavti, I also loved her. I also loved her. This is a very common way for the infinitive to be working. Oh, there we go. While I was looking, that also works. Or when I saw. You kind of have to determine what's going to be the best English translation. Or while I was looking, when I saw Sarah, I also loved her. Literally in my seeing, as I have there. Okay, let's look now at the infinitive absolute. I'm only going to do one slide on this. We're not going to spend a lot of time with the infinitive absolute, but it is important that you recognize it. The infinitive absolute typically has the following pattern. So here we have amor and amor. This is not love, amor. This is amor, saying, having to do with speaking. And I want you to note here, beware of that you could confuse this with the passive participle very easily. There's a holum between the second and third roots in the infinitive absolute, whereas in the passive participle, it's a shurek. So katuv, try not to confuse the infinitive absolute with the passive participle. The infinitive absolute takes absolutely the infinitive absolute takes no prepositions, no suffixes. If you see a verb that you think is an infinitive and it has a preposition or a suffix, it is the infinitive construct, not the absolute. The infinitive absolute can't take them. Thirdly, the infinitive absolute is often used to add emphasis to other verbs of the same root. This is a very common use of it. There are other possible uses of the infinitive absolute. We're not going to worry about them in this class. That would be maybe for a more advanced time. But here are just a few examples. Im shamua tishme'u. So if you will really hear. And so notice the really is coming from the fact that you have shamoa and then tishme'u. And so these are both from the same root, right? Shama and shama. Shamoa and tishme'u, sorry. So the infinitive absolute here is really functioning to emphasize the verb of the same root. Let's look at another one. Yadoa teda et pnei achika. Sorry. Yadoa teda et pnei achika. Lots of chets in there. And strong CH sounds. So here we have knowing, let's do this woodenly, knowing, oops, where's my cursor? Knowing you will know the face of your brother, or what we would do in English, you will really know the face of your brother as it is over here. Amor amarti ki bnei ata. I have surely said that, ki, my son you are. Yoda English, right? But saying I have said that my son you are, that you are my, I have surely said. So again, the verbal root, the same verbal root is used for both the absolute and the perfect as a way of emphasis. Ra'o ra'iti et amecha. I have surely seen your people. So here we have the word for people, with cha, second masculine singular, and then the real point here, ra'o ra'iti, surely I have surely seen your people. So again, there you have the infinitive absolute functioning to emphasize the verb, the finite verb. That's the conclusion of this video. I want to give you a couple study tips. First, remember imperatives are imperfect verbs with their heads chopped off. Think about them that way when you're trying to recognize them. So you would benefit this week from reviewing the imperfect so that you can recognize it very well. The better you know the imperfect, the more easily you will learn the imperative. Secondly, yeah, as I say, so the best way to learn the imperative is to be familiar with the imperfect. Secondly, learn to count. dedicate time to learning those numbers. It's going to make the sentences this week and in your quiz quite a bit easier. Well, I look forward to interacting with you this week in our conference calls, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.